former public school teacher. For those of you that don't know, I taught elementary school for 12 years before I started homeschooling my kids. And because I have that background, one of the hardest things about homeschooling my own children, it has nothing to do with the curriculum and the scheduling and the work-life balance. For me, my biggest issue is something called deschooling, or trying to deschool within our homeschool. Now, I did not even know that deschooling was a thing. I had never even heard that term until probably about a year into our homeschooling journey. And that was after people kind of saw how rigid I was with our homeschool. And they're like, I think you need to deschool. Like, what is deschool? Deschooling, if you don't know, it is different than unschooling. I know those two terms can sometimes get mixed up, totally different. Unschooling is a way that you homeschool where you're not really using like a set curriculum, you don't have like a set schedule, it's kind of like free homeschooling, right? That's unschooling. Deschooling is a process that you go through when you first start homeschooling. And to be honest with you, we are 4 years into our homeschooling journey now. I am still deschooling. Okay, so it's not something that you just do and it's done, right? Especially when you have this public school teacher mindset background, like it can take years. And in my case, it is taking years. This is a process where you're basically trying to mentally detach yourself from that school system mindset. And I know that sounds like that should just come naturally when you're homeschooling because you're in your house, you're not in a school setting, like you think it would come naturally. It doesn't. It does not come naturally, especially when you're a prior teacher. Now, this is gonna look different depending on the family, depending on the background. For me, starting out with our homeschooling journey, I'm not even kidding you, the first schedule that I ever made, my daughter was 3, by the way, was like an 8 to 5 schedule. Like we're gonna wake up, we're gonna do chores, we're gonna, do a little morning basket, then we're gonna take a little break, we're gonna go outside, we're gonna play. Everything was scheduled out minute by minute. You can actually go back and look at my initial videos that I made when I first started scheduling our homeschool. I had already begun to deschool at that point, but I still was a little more stringent with the schedule. I've changed a lot over the years thanks to deschooling. When I left the classroom, I was still very supportive of public education in general. I was a ride or die public school teacher. Never in a million years would have thought that I would be homeschooling. When people would talk to me as a teacher about homeschooling, I immediately shut it down. Like I was all for public education. That was my life. Okay, I never thought I would have my own children. My life was being a teacher. So I was a huge advocate for it. I advocated for the schedules and the rigidity. And even in my classroom as a public school teacher, I ran a very tight ship, right? But my scores were amazing because I placed such an emphasis on having everything super organized. So part of that organization is having a good schedule. That is why a lot of people find me on my social media channels for my homeschool organization and scheduling tips. However, it's kind of like a double-edged sword. So because I already had that mindset that rigid scheduling and running a tight ship, those are all positives because I did see great success in my classroom doing it that way, I felt like I needed to replicate that in our homeschool. So again, that meant in the beginning, having my 3-year-old child sitting at the table doing workbooks and having this schedule. And yes, play was built in, but it wasn't natural play. It wasn't like we just kind of led into play. It was scheduled play like it would be in the school system. And what's so crazy is I thought this was great. Like I saw nothing wrong with this at all until I started having more kids. Now we have 4 kids and it has become so apparent to me how important it is to deschool, to detach myself from that 8 to 5 rigid homeschool schedule to where now you can go watch my day in the life videos. It's taking us around 3 hours to finish all of our schooling for the day. And I have started incorporating family style subjects where we sit at the table and we all do science together, we all do health together, we all do social studies together, which is crazy to even say because in the beginning of this journey, I was so against family style curriculums because I felt like each individual child needed a workbook on their level. Now, I do still stand by that for core subjects like math, language arts, reading. However, family style subjects can really, really take the pressure off you having to have such a rigid schedule and have these time frames for each child. And then you can work on having those individual time frames for the core subjects only. So now that I've given you a little bit of history of how my deschooling journey started, once we started having more kids, and I'm like, okay, this is just not working. And very, very thankful to all of the creators out there who have deschooled themselves or do have a more flexible, relaxed style of homeschooling, because I have binged your channels. I am still a little old school in that I do think we need a schedule and we need a curriculum. Like, we haven't flipped to the unschooling side of things, but I'm a lot more relaxed than I once was. So why is deschooling important? Like, why shouldn't we replicate the public school system in our homeschool? Well, when you step back and you look at a public school system, when you walk into a public school classroom, this is private school as well, I'm not just dogging on public, but I taught primarily at public. The kids are told what to do, when to do it. There's very little room for making their own decisions, and critical thinking skills are really lacking. You're told where to stand in line, how to walk to from class to class, and I get why that's important. You cannot have kids just running through the hallways. There does have to be order, but when I think back to my time as a teacher and everybody's standing in line, facing forward, quiet, everybody's in alphabetical order in the line, that's how I ran things. It kind of reminds me of the military now. And I was in the military, by the way. So it's interesting that really didn't dawn on me while I was in the system, but now that I've been out of the system for so long, when I think back to that, it does give military vibes. Do what you're told, when you're told to do it. Don't ask questions. Don't try to problem solve, because we have a schedule that we have to adhere to and we don't have time for that. So one reason why I feel like deschooling is so important is because I really want my kids to be able to think for themselves. I don't want to constantly have to tell them what to do, when to do it, how to do it. I want to give them guidance, but I also want them to have choice. And so part of that choice would be, are we doing math first or reading first today? How do you want to change up your day? They also know if they're playing around and they take too long to do an activity or something, they can't just stop to go play outside. It's not that flexible, but it's actually helping them make their own decisions. Okay, if I sit down and I focus and get my work done, then I can go outside and do something that I actually enjoy. It's not a clock telling them when it's time to go outside. It's them knowing, if I apply myself and I finish what I'm doing right now, then I can go outside. So what did deschooling look like for us? Again, we are still in the process. I feel like I'm always going to be in the process. I'm always trying to get myself out of that rigid public school mindset, and I've gotten a lot better over the years, but I will tell you that this is not something that just happens overnight. Now, I'm speaking from the unique position of someone that was a teacher, and I'm trying to get myself out of that mindset, but a lot of families have to go through this deschooling process simply because the child was in public school for so many years and that's all they know. So parents, even without any public school teaching background, still feel like they need to have that rigid 8 to 5 system of a schedule. And so families in that case, a lot of them, what they choose to do is to take a break. You pull your kid out of public school, and as long as your state doesn't have any rigid laws about how many days you have to homeschool, take a break, right? This could be a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever works for you. Just kind of decompress, right? And then try to get into the groove of things. For us, instead of taking a break, we jumped right in. However, deschooling for us was more so of a mindset change for me. So doing little things like adding in a family style subject instead of having everybody with their own workbook for every single subject. Especially if you have a child who was in a school system and they had a bad experience, you really want to take this deschooling time to kind of help them rediscover their love of learning. As sad as that sounds, the fact that we even have to help children rediscover their love of learning is so depressing to me, but it is a reality. So doing this deschooling period, whether it's taking that long break or doing what I did and just changing little things little by little, right? It is so important for their outlook on learning, for them to rediscover that love of learning if that's something that they lost. Now, when you start this deschooling process, you might fall into the category of people like me, where you feel like you're falling behind. Right? You're like, wait a minute, we just took 3 weeks off, or wait a minute, we're not doing math every single day, or we're not doing it for 45 minutes a day, maybe we're falling behind. To me, the way to combat this, and this is something I struggle with daily, is that falling behind feeling. The way that I combat this is by doing year-round schooling. Schooling year-round and not taking a big summer break. I'm able to take breaks whenever I want, and we just go from August to August. We literally go year-round. We take 1 week breaks every single month, a couple weeks in December, a couple weeks in the summer, and it still will equate to 180 days of school. If you are limiting yourself to only 10 months in the calendar, let's say you take a big summer break and you're only gonna do school 10 months out of the year, you're gonna feel a lot more pressure to get through all of your curriculum and stay on track if you're only doing that 10 months out of the year. So by extending it to 12 months out of the year and taking breaks when you feel fit, it really, really helps with that feeling of, oh my gosh, we're falling behind. And the last thing that I wanna say on this deschooling topic is that this is gonna look different for everybody. And because I am still very much of that old school traditional mindset that yes, we need structure, yes, we need a schedule, yes, we need to use a real curriculum, my deschooling journey is gonna look a lot different than somebody who maybe wants to go the unschooling route and not even use a traditional curriculum, which by the way, that does work for a lot of families. But obviously, given my mindset, my background, and the way I think things need to be done, I'm not gonna go with that route, but a lot of families do and it works. Also keep in mind that my kids have all been homeschooled since the very beginning, since day one. So the deschooling process is really about me. It's not about my kids because they don't need to deschool. They weren't ever in school to even know. It's me. So that's gonna look different from family to family too, where it actually might be your kids that need to deschool more so than you. I'm talking right down to your kid in your homeschool asking to use the restroom. As silly as that sounds, you will see that with new homeschooling families, children who have been in public school for year after year, private school, whatever, any kind of system. They're gonna feel the need to ask permission to do everything. And that goes back to that like bodily autonomy. Like if you need to go to the bathroom, get up and go. Like you don't need to ask me. Like that should be a natural thing. That is even in a work setting, right? If you're at work as an adult working an 8 to 5 and you've got to pee in the middle of your shift, are you raising your hand to ask somebody to go? Like that's crazy, right? So the kids are gonna need to deschool sometimes even more so than the parents. In my case, it's gonna look different because my kids don't know anything other than homeschooling. But if you just stick to that mindset of the purpose of deschooling being that you are just trying to ease into this homeschooling world, which is a new world for a lot of people. Like I had no experience with homeschooling prior to doing it. That deschooling process is really meant to help you discover your love of teaching while your child's rediscovering their love of learning. Slowly easing into the homeschool world, you're trying to figure out what works for your family, for your schedule, for your child, and to not feel so tied down to a systemic structure of schedule and rigidity and planning and all those wonderful things that really do have basis in a homeschool, but it doesn't need to be the overarching purpose of your homeschool. I would love to know in the comments anybody that has gone through the deschooling process, whether that's from the teacher side of things, parent side of things, or if your child had to go through this process. Let me know how it went, and I will see you all next time.